Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome back to Super Kaiju Binge episode 14. And yes, I'm sporting a brand new pair of shades here because why not? And yes, I have my hair slicked back just for you guys because I wanted to look fancy. Whatever. Today, oh boy. Today, we are talking about a very special film. The first of the three Kaiju movies that came out in 1965 that I will be doing. And I don't know. It's debatably my favorite. I don't really know. I'll have to think about that. But as of right now, I'm going to say this is my favorite of the three monster movies. And ironically, of the three monster movies that I'm reviewing and that came out in 1965, I consider all three of them to be some of my favorites. But today we're starting with the most unique of the three, in my opinion. 1965's Frankenstein versus Baragon. Or as it was referred to in the States, Frankenstein Conquers the World. I like the title Frankenstein versus Baragon much better. Yes, indeed, Frankenstein versus Baragon. I'm going to take these off now. I do consider this to be one of my favorite monster movies ever made, and I consider this to be in my opinion, one of the most underrated monster movies ever made. And okay, it seems like the lighting's going to be a little off, so I got to get my lamp. Hold that thought. Ugh. Okay, that's better. Okay, yeah, that's way better. Take these off now. So Frankenstein versus Baragon came out in 1965, like I just said. And I consider this to be one of the most underrated monster movies ever made. This movie does have its fans, and I've seen some people say that they like the movie and they enjoy the movie. In fact, Gorzard, way back in the day, put this on his list of top 15 favorite kaiju films. I think it was number 7 or 6. But there also have been some people that have come out and said they don't really care for this film. In my eyes, most infamously, Adam Noyes, who just doesn't care for this movie for some reason. And I really don't get it. I think this movie is a true gem. I think it is, like I said, it's one of the most underrated, like truly, painfully one of the most underrated monster movies ever made. It's very unique. It's very special. It's just a great film, in my opinion. And I really think people don't give this movie enough credit that it deserves. So my personal history with Frankenstein versus Baragon, growing up, this movie always really kind of stuck out to me because it seemed like it was a very interesting film. And I would read the plot and I would read some of the production history, and it always really did seem like a very interesting movie. And though for some reason I just never got around to seeing it, and it didn't help that this movie was pretty expensive for quite a long time. It was, of course, initially put out by Tokyo Shock, and then they went out of business, so the DVDs were out of print for a little while. Then came back on Amazon, and it stayed at $40 for a very long time. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll get around to buying this, but $40 for one movie I still think is way too steep. So finally it came down to being $25 on Amazon. And I just decided, okay, you know what? It's not going to get any better than this, so I may as well just do it. So I bought the movie, and of course, in preparation for my Hondathon, and watched the movie. I watched the Japanese cut. I was very impressed. I was very, very impressed. I don't know why the hell it took me so long to get around to watching this movie, but I was very, very pleasantly surprised. I really liked this movie. Instantly became a huge favorite of mine. And to this day, I still do strongly, strongly, strongly defend this movie. And like I said, I'll keep reiterating it as much as I want. I think this movie is miserably and painfully underrated. So with all that being said, um, there's not much to say about the film's production. Um, Toho had always been interested in the Frankenstein character um, since back in 1961. Tomiyuki Tanaka commissioned a movie called Frankenstein versus the Human Vapor, which would act as a sequel to Ishiro Honda's The Human Vapor. And the Mizuno character from that film finds the body of Frankenstein's monster and revive him so that he can help use the Frankenstein formula to revive his beloved girlfriend, Fujichio, who, of course, died at the end of the film. And as a rough draft, it was being written by Takashi Kimura, and it was ultimately canceled, unfortunately, before the draft was finished. And then in 1962, Toho purchased a script from John Beck, who is an independent producer from America, who called King Kong vs. Prometheus. Beck had actually stolen the story treatment, which was originally called King Kong Meets Frankenstein from Willis O'Brien, and had George Worthing Yates flesh it out into a screenplay. Toho wanted to have King Kong fight their own monster, Godzilla, instead of the Frankenstein giant in the original story. And after working a deal out with Beck, as well as RKO, being the current copyright holders of King Kong, they, of course, made King Kong vs. Godzilla. Wow, what a dick. So, influenced by the concept of the giant Frankenstein monster from the King Kong vs. Prometheus story, Toho planned on making a Frankenstein vs. Godzilla film as a follow-up to King Kong vs. Godzilla. And this was written in 1963 by Takashi Kimura. The story dealt with the heart of the original Frankenstein monster becoming irradiated and growing into a Frankenstein monster giant. And afraid this giant would start eating humans, Godzilla would be freed from an icy prison and goaded into a fight and being seen as the lesser of two evils in hopes that Godzilla would kill off the giant Frankenstein monster. Even though King Kong vs. Godzilla had already been made with Godzilla escaping from an iceberg, scriptwriter Mabuchi thought, with Godzilla disappearing into the ocean at the end of the film, that the idea of Godzilla once again becoming frozen could still work. I don't think it really would have. It just would have felt repetitive, but whatever. This would end up, the story would end with natural disasters defeating both monsters as Godzilla disappears into a raging river and the Frankenstein giant disappears into magma caused by an erupting volcano. Kind of consider that to be a more conclusive death for Frankenstein, but whatever. Unfortunately, Toho was not fond of the logistics of the story, so this was dropped. And then, of course, Mothra Godzilla rolled around. Mothra vs. Godzilla was made, and history was made. But to not waste the idea, Toho just decided to morph this script, keep Frankenstein, change around story elements of the script, and, of course, replace Godzilla with a new monster, Baragon. And bada bing, bada boom, the movie was made and history was made. So with all that being said, let's get into the plot of Frankenstein versus Baragon. During World War II in Nazi Germany, Nazi officers confiscate the heart of Frankenstein's monster from a Dr. Riesendorf, played by Peter Mann, and pass it on to the Imperial Japanese Navy, who take it to a research facility in Hiroshima for further experimentation. As the experiments begin, Hiroshima is bombed with a nuclear weapon by the Americans. 15 years later, a feral boy runs rampant in the streets of Hiroshima, catching and devouring small animals. This comes to the attention of American scientist Dr. James Bowen, played by Nick Adams, in his first appearance in a Toho film, and also his first of 3 movies that he did in 1965, the other being Die Monster Die with Boris Karloff, and of course the third and final being Invasion of the Astro Monster, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks. Or in a week. Excuse me. So Dr. James Bowen and his assistants, Doctors Suiko Togami, played by Kumi Mizuno, and Kenichiro Kawaji, played by Tadao Takashima, one of the 2 bumbling idiots from King Kong vs. Godzilla. A year later, so we're in 1961 now, they find the boy hiding in a cave on a beach, cornered by outrage. Wait, no. Yeah, 1961. A year later, they find the boy hiding in a cave on a beach, cornered by outraged villagers. Bowen and his team take care of the boy and discover that he is building a strong resistance to radiation. The former Imperial Navy officer Kawai, played by Yoshio Tsuchiya, who had brought the heart to Hiroshima's army hospital, is now working in an oil factory in Akita Prefecture when a sudden earthquake destroys the refinery. Kawai catches a glimpse of a non-human monster within a fissure before it disappears. While this is going on, Bowen and his team find out that the strange boy is growing in size due to an intake of protein. Afraid of his strength, the scientists lock and chain the boy in a cage, and Suiko, who cares for him, feeds him some protein-filled food to sustain him. Bowen is visited by Kawai, who tells him that the boy could have grown from the heart of Frankenstein's monster. As the boy was seen in Hiroshima more than once before, and at Bowen's advice, Kawaji confers with Dr. Riesendorf in Frankfurt, and he recommends cutting off a limb, speculating that a new one will grow in its stead. Suiko and Bowen strongly object to this method, but ignoring Bowen's suggestion to think it over, Kawaji tenaciously attempts to sever one of the limbs of the boy-turned-giant, now called Frankenstein. And let me get this out of the way. I know that everybody keeps saying and people have always been so confused at the same time as well, that the monster itself is called Frankenstein. I am aware that the name Frankenstein is the name of the scientist who created the monster, not the monster itself. However, in my opinion, and the way that I think people should look at it is, the monster should take the name of Frankenstein, because if you think about it, why should he not? He was created by a guy named Frankenstein, so why should he not take the name of his creator as his own? But whatever. That's just my interpretation. So we will be referring to the monster as Frankenstein. He is interrupted by a TV crew, however, who enrage Frankenstein with bright studio lights, and in the process, Frankenstein breaks loose and kills some people in the process. Frankenstein visits Suiko at her apartment before disappearing into the woods. And unbeknownst to Bowen and his team, the subterranean monster Baragon has been ravaging various villages throughout the Japanese Alps. Japanese authorities and media believe this to be Frankenstein's doing, and the monster narrowly escapes being hunted down by the JSDF. Before Bowen and his team dismiss Frankenstein, Kawai returns to tell him that Frankenstein may not be responsible for the disasters, and it could be the monster he saw in Akita. He tries to convince the authorities, but to no avail. Kawaji still wishes the scientists luck in finding and saving Frankenstein. Bowen, Suiko, and Kawaji attempt to find him on their own, but to Bowen and Suiko's shock, Kawaji reveals his plans out of nowhere to kill Frankenstein by blinding him with grenades in order to recover his heart and his brain. Kawaji presses on to find Frankenstein, but finds Baragon instead, like a moron. Kawaji and Bowen try in vain to stop the monster with grenades, but Frankenstein emerges in time to save Suiko, and the two then get into a spectacular fight throughout the Japanese mountainscape. The monsters battle until eventually Frankenstein wins by snapping Baragon's neck. And then in the version of the ending that I saw, the earth beneath them collapses and swallows them both. Kawaji states that the immortal heart will live on and that they may one day see him again, but Bowen believes, also out of nowhere, that Frankenstein is better off dead. I am aware that there is the alternate ending that after Frankenstein kills Baragon, literally right out of but the fuck nowhere, a giant octopus crawls out of nowhere and engages Frankenstein in a fight, ensnares him, and pulls him into a Japanese lake and presumably eats him. So how about this plot? Well, I really like it. I think it's... Hang on one sec. One sec. I really like this movie's story. I think it feels very unique. It touches on a lot of really kind of taboo subjects, especially in the Japanese mainstream at the time. And I think it's really ballsy that the filmmakers decided to make this movie about certain subjects that were still really touchy at the time. It deals with World War II. It deals with Hiroshima being bombed. It deals with organ transplants, and it kind of tries to be a bit of a horror movie at times. This is a much darker movie. There's quite a bit of blood, like I said, or I'll say in a little bit. There's just some gruesome aspects about this movie that you don't really see per se, but it's just really implied. And there's some really grim and dark subject matter in this movie that makes this movie, in my opinion, really stand out amongst the crowd of family-friendly monster movies, which aren't bad per se, but because this movie feels a bit different from the norm, I think that makes it more refreshing, and it also makes it more unique. So with that being said, let's jump into the pros and cons of Frankenstein versus Baragon. Pro number one is I almost said the main three characters. The main two characters in this movie being Dr. Bowen and Dr. Suiko are quite good. They're a good duo. Nick Adams, of course, was an American actor who got lassoed into being in this movie. I think at first he wasn't down for doing this, but because of working with Ishiro Honda, he quickly learned that, oh, these movies are actually really fun. So I kind of like doing this. He does a really good job with his character. I like how his scientist character is a good mix of mind and heart, if that makes any sense. Like War of the Gargantuas does this too, but to a much more exaggerated way, in a much more unlikable way. But here I think it's done way better. With the three main characters, because once again, a Ishiro Honda movie, you always have a trio of characters, but there's one character that I don't like. But Dr. Bowen's character, he's a mix. He's got both heart and mind with how he goes about things. Kumi Mizuno's character is all about heart. All she wants to do is look after Frankenstein and make sure that nothing happens to him, while not necessarily ignoring, but just kind of not acknowledging, that's kind of the same thing, but like she doesn't really care about the potential bad things that may come with having a giant 20-meter hungry rabid retard running around. And yeah, Frankenstein's retarded, not gonna lie. Running around. She just wants to look after him and make sure that he's safe. Dr. Kawhi is all about mind. All he cares about is scientific gain and being kind of cruel towards an innocent retard who just can't help being a giant, and he's just hungry. And he just wants to be a sadistic asshole. Dr. Bowen he has both. He does realize that there are some scientific questions that he wants to have answered about Frankenstein, and he does realize that they could learn some things from Frankenstein. But on the other hand, he also does have some heart, and he does want to treat Frankenstein with some care and not be a dickhead towards him, and actually look after him and look out for his well-being. So he's a good mix of both. Again, War of the Gargantuas does this as well, to a much lesser extent, in my opinion. But we'll talk about that when we talk about War of the Gargantuas. But I think the main two characters, so yeah, we'll say Nick Castle's character, he's good, and then Kumi Mizuno. Now, Kumi Mizuno is a big fan favorite female actress in Toho films. She always kind of played the more sluttish, bitchy characters throughout Ishiro Honda movies. Here is a little bit of a deviation from the norm. Apparently, actually, Nick Castle and Kumi Mizuno did actually have an affair in real life. But they have good chemistry on screen. It's both a good professional working relationship, and it's also a good personal relationship. Like, you see these two on screen, they're kind of being flirty and coy with each other. So I definitely can see some good chemistry between the two, but they also work well together, which is nice to see as well. And Kumi Mizuno does a really good job in this movie. Thankfully, she's not like the Venusian from Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster, or Susan, not Linda, that's the actress's name. Not Susan in King Kong Escapes, where she just puts herself in danger to create fake tension. She kind of does that in War of the Gargantuas, but again, not quite as bad. But Kumi Mizuno's character, she's not like that. As soon as she sees that there's danger, she runs away. And she just so happens to trip and get caught up in the process. But she's not a damsel in distress per se. She's not an annoying one. She just so happens to get caught up in danger. But aside from that, she's very proactive. She tries to figure out solutions to the problems. And she also works very well with Nick Castle's character as well. So it's good to see that. So overall, I like the two main characters in this movie. We'll talk about Dr. Kawhi in just a bit. Pro number 2 is I think this movie is paced very, very well. Every single scene feels important. It's not rushed. It's not too slow. It is a bit of a slower burn, which I noticed in this most recent viewing, but it's not slow to the point where it's boring. It's slow as in it's drawing you into the story, and it's hooking you with its characters, and it's hooking you with its tone and atmosphere. So this is definitely an example of a slow-ish burn that I do like. But when the movie gets more action-packed, it's paced perfectly. It's not too long. It's not too slow. It's just perfect, in my opinion. So this movie's paced very well. Pro number 3 is the music score. Of course, Akira Ifukube came back to do the score for this movie, and of course, he gives us an absolutely fantastic music score. It's a little bit repetitive at times, and if you're familiar with later Showa Godzilla movies, there's a lot of music cues from this film that sound familiar, but here they're fitting as well. The music's really great, especially in the first half. The music is really dark. There's a lot of really subtle and like low-pitched droning and instrumental music that's really good, and it fits the atmosphere in the first half of this film. And of course, the music in the second half of the film especially during the final monster fight, is really brash and bombastic and very fun and entertaining to listen to. So I wouldn't necessarily say this is one of my favorite Akira Ifukube scores, but it still is very, very good, and I would consider it to be one of Akira Ifukube's more unique film scores, and a very good one at that. Pro number 4 is this movie has a very good tone. This is another thing that I really feel like people don't give this movie credit for. This isn't necessarily a horror film, but it definitely is a bit of a darker movie. And it's definitely a bit more of a gruesome and mature film, for lack of a better term. It deals a lot with monsters eating animals and possibly eating people. And it deals with darker subject matter like organ transplanting, which especially back in Japan back in the 1960s, organ transplanting was really taboo for some reason. And I think part of it was just because they felt like it was disrespectful to the person who's donating an organ. Like, I guess they thought it was really disrespectful for some reason. It's done a lot more nowadays, but I think there's still like a little bit of like controversy, I'll say, for lack of a better term, surrounding that. But especially back in these days, dealing with organ transplanting, it was really not a thing that people talked about. And again, I feel like this movie is really ballsy for wanting to talk about stuff like that, especially in a monster film. It also deals with World War II and Hiroshima, which are still very touchy subjects to this day. But back in 1965, this was only 20 years after the end of World War II. So I'm sure it was still fresh in people's minds, and seeing the opening 10 minutes of this movie, which is literally World War II and the bombing of Hiroshima, probably did bring back some memories for a lot of people seeing this movie. But the movie doesn't make light of it, and it doesn't exploit it. It's just, well, some may see it as being bad that it uses that as a plot device, but I mean, I don't. It's not like they do it disrespectfully. They just say, hey, this is how the movie starts. We're dealing with Hiroshima. Yeah, it sucks, but we're not going to linger on that. So, and just in general, this movie's kind of violent. There's some people that die. Like when Frankenstein breaks free from his cage, there's a shot where we see two people that are crushed under debris and there's some blood. And there's a moment early in the movie where we see a dismembered rabbit, literally a dismembered rabbit, all over the floor in a classroom. Frankenstein gets his hand torn off. He gets his leg broken. And Frankenstein kills Baragon by snapping his neck quite violently. So this movie's quite violent, and the tone and atmosphere in the first half of the film is also very good as well. So, like I said, it's a bit of a slow-ish burn, and it almost feels like a horror movie. It's got a really gothic and kind of creepy, doomy atmosphere to it, and also that helps that the movie's color is not really faded per se, but this movie's not super like bright blues and purples and green colored. It's a bit saturated. It's a bit of a duller, darker color. And I think that adds this movie's charm and atmosphere. It feels like a classic. It feels like a universal horror movie that was made in Japan and in color with a giant fire-breathing dog dragon in it. So yeah, I like this movie's tone. It definitely is very unique. It's a bit darker. It's a bit more mature. It's a bit more violent. Yeah, I love it. And I think that's one of the reasons why this movie stands out to me as much as it does. Pro number 5 is Baragon. I absolutely love. Yeah, I know Ishiro Honda was in World War II. From what I heard, he absolutely hated it. But I love Baragon. I consider Baragon to be one of the most underrated Toho Kaiju of all time. He certainly would be a good monster that would serve well in the MonsterVerse, in my opinion. There's nothing super like ridiculous. He's not like an Ultraman monster later in the franchise, where it's like an insect cyborg robot type thing. No, he's an ancient species of fire-breathing dinosaur that just happens to burrow underground and has a glowing nasal horn and giant puppy dog eyes. But I love Baragon. I love his design, love his roar, love his power set. I love Baragon. I think he's an incredibly underrated monster. I have one problem with him, but I'll talk about that when I get to the cons. But overall, not much to say. And I love his role in the final battle. But I'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, I love Baragon. Let's see. Pro number 6 is Frankenstein himself. Discounting Robert De Niro as the Frankenstein monster in 1994's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, this is my favorite version of Frankenstein. Ironically, it's the one that's the most drastically and radically different from the book's version of Frankenstein. I have read the original Frankenstein novel. Yes, I'm just going to get that out of there. But yeah, this is my favorite version of Frankenstein. Anytime you take a character and then just turn him into a giant and have him fight another monster, that's right up my alley. But I really do like this version of Frankenstein. Obviously, they're trying to pay a massive homage to Boris Karloff as the Frankenstein monster in Universal's movies with the really giant 5 head and the pronounced squarish brow and the veins all throughout his neck and his body, and having the kind of flat buzz cut look. It definitely looks like a Japanese version of the Universal Frankenstein design. And by the way, they try to call him Caucasian in this film. The bullshit. You take one look at him, you can clearly tell he's Japanese. Just like that one character in Latitude Zero who is clearly Japanese, but they say that he's French. French my ass. But whatever. But yeah, I love this version of Frankenstein. He's not an evil monster. He's a very sympathetic monster. And like this movie was written by Takashi Kimura, and I say that honestly, this is my favorite script that Takashi Kimura ever wrote, because here he 100% nails making the monsters the main characters and also the most sympathetic. Frankenstein, in my opinion, is very sympathetic in this film. He's just a giant creature that's trying to survive in a world that just wasn't made for him. He doesn't attack people, at least not intentionally. When he rises out of Lake Biwa, when there's a boat coming towards him, he doesn't attack it. He doesn't menace it. He just gets out of its way. When there's people in the area, he hides or goes into his cave or runs away. When there's people that are shooting at him, he charges at them, but he doesn't attack them. He just gets out of their way. All he's trying to do is just live and get food. Why is that an issue? Even though he's retarded as all living shit, he's a very sympathetic character. And yeah, I love him. And the guy who plays Frankenstein does a very good job too. I can't remember his name. Koji Furuhata plays Frankenstein. I believe this may have been his only film that he was ever in. I think he had a small part in an Akira Kurosawa film. But I believe this was like his only big major role. And he does a great job. His facial expressions are really good. His body mannerism and body language is really good as portraying obviously a retard, but he has a little bit more to him. He's aware of his surroundings. He's aware that he's a monster, but he doesn't try to hurt people. And also his body language around Kumi Mizuno is really good. A good scene is when he escapes his cage and he kills those 2 reporters. He runs to Suiko's apartment, and as soon as he sees Suiko, his body like relaxes a little bit and he calms down and chills out. But then when he hears the police sirens, he tenses up again and he hears them, and he gives her one last longing look, and then he just runs away. Yeah, he does a really good job. Hope he was paid well because he played a good Frankenstein monster. Pro number 7 is the special effects in this movie, for the most part, are very, very, very solid. Great fucking special effects. You can tell this movie's budget was either a bit bigger or they just made great use of it. The miniature effects of trying to create the illusion that Frankenstein is 20 meters in height are fantastic. Like, they created these mini neighborhoods for Frankenstein to roam about in. And they created all these Japanese landscapes in the mountains for Frankenstein to roam about in. Like, they created a miniature forest for him to run around in. Looks great. Definitely does maintain the illusion of him being a giant. All the cavernous areas that Baragon stalks about in look great. And when Baragon erupts out of the mountainside to attack his first village in his debut in the movie, looks awesome. He comes out with his horn glowing, he's roaring, and he's just tossing boulders and just literally erupting out of the wall. It looks awesome. And his rampages through the various villages look really great. The miniature sets are well made. The explosions are great. The fire effects are awesome. The Baragon suit itself looks very, very well made. Of course, Baragon was played by Haruo Nakajima. And this damn Baragon suit would be reused for so many monsters in the Ultraman franchise. It's insane. It was reused for Pagos and Ultra Q, Niranga in Ultraman, Gabora in Ultraman, Magular. There's a couple other monsters. Maybe, Zambalar, I believe it was reused for. There are so many monsters throughout the Ultraman franchise that the Baragon suit was reused for. It's nuts, but definitely the first debut of the Baragon suit looks great in this movie. The puppet effects for the miniature Baragon head, obviously it is a puppet, but it's well detailed and it looks good. The eyes move around fairly well. The ears flap up and down well. The horn lights up. It looks really good. The optical beam effects for Baragon's fire breath look really cool. Overall, the special effects in this movie are absolutely top notch. And this will lead me into pro number 8 is the final monster battle. There's really only one monster battle in this movie, but it's really, really fucking awesome. It's very dynamic. It's very fast paced. And I believe they did not film this at a slow frame rate and then set the footage to normal. I think they just filmed the characters running about normally, and it shows. This fight is very, very, very animalistic. It's very vicious. It's very nasty. It's very quick and fast paced. And they do, once again, a very good speedster and Juggernaut type situation where Frankenstein is the quick speedster. He's really fast. He's really agile. He's very nimble. He's quick on his feet. He's also strong, but Baragon is the unstoppable force. He's large. He's a tank. He just keeps coming, and he puts Frankenstein on his ass a few times, but every single time Frankenstein just hops right back up. But his weakness is that he's a bit slow, and that's what causes Frankenstein to ultimately win. But still, Baragon puts up a very, very good fight. And I still maintain this fight is very much like a prototype version of an Ultraman battle. Because of Frankenstein's fighting style, he's very much so a grappler. And he's a bit of a wrestler. He punches and kicks and chops a few times, but he's very much so a brute force wrestler. Like, he lifts Baragon over his head a couple times and throws him, grabs him by two of his feet, and like ring around the rosy cartwheel tosses him, as I said when I was watching the movie. Grabs him by his tail and tosses him around a couple times. And often he jumps on Baragon's back and like puts him in a headlock and wrestles him about. There He's also good at using his surroundings. He'll use a tree to bash Baragon in the face. He'll toss a couple boulders down on Baragon, on his tail, which pisses him off. And there's one scene right as Baragon was about to like pounce on him, Frankenstein sticks a rock into Baragon's mouth, kicks Baragon in the stomach, and sends him on his ass. So Frankenstein is very good at using his environment to his advantage. And it's very fun to watch. And like I said, it's absolutely spectacular. It's one of the greatest monster movie battles of all time, in my opinion. It's just great. It's decently long, too. I'd say it's about 12 minutes or so that the final monster battle is. Yeah. Well, Hiro Nakajima was just their go-to monster guy, so it's interesting there too. But I also just feel like they were just being logical. But whatever. So yeah, I love the monster battle in this movie. It's absolutely awesome. It's entertaining. It's just great, and very fun to watch. Now, with all these good things to say about this movie, unlike my original review, I have a couple problems. One of them is a bit minor, but I do have a few problems. Actually, no. Well, yeah, I do have a couple problems. The bit of a minor one. So con number one is the lack of Baragon. Baragon doesn't show up until I think about 57 minutes into this movie, and it's 90 minutes long. I think it's a little disappointing that the movie's called Frankenstein versus Baragon. Now, I do realize that this is mostly a Frankenstein film, but because the movie is called Frankenstein versus Baragon, to have Baragon himself show up almost an hour into the film is a little disappointing. And this leads to Baragon not really having that much screen time. He has a great screen presence, which is awesome. Like I said, him erupting out of the side of the mountain and eating all those pigs and horses and chickens, especially seeing him walk around with all the feathers coming out of his mouth is a little comical. And like he fills up the screen. His fight with Frankenstein is awesome. And just watching Baragon be Baragon is fun. So he has a great screen presence. It's just unfortunately he doesn't have that much screen time in the film. And this also leads into another minor issue, is that it kind of does ultimately feel like Baragon doesn't really have much to do with the story other than just be an antagonistic force for Frankenstein to fight. It's not as bad as like a King Kong monster, for example, but it's just unfortunate that Frankenstein doesn't have that much screen time and he doesn't feel like he has much to do with the plot except for give Frankenstein something to fight, as cool as the fight is. So yeah, the lack of Baragon in the sense of the story is a little disappointing, and it's just a tad frustrating, especially since I like Baragon as much as I do. And like I said, I consider him to be one of the most underrated Toho kaiju. Con number two is, let's see, what's his name? Yeah, oh no, it's Dr. Kawaji. Excuse me. Why did I say Kawai? Dr. Kawaji, I don't really care for this character because in the first act or so, he does come off as just being a typical scientific colleague. But in the second and especially the third act, he just kind of comes off as being a narcissistic, despicable asshole. Especially in the third act, his desire to blind and kill Frankenstein and just harvest his heart and his brain kind of comes out of nowhere. He did seem like he was leaning more towards maybe euthanizing Frankenstein, not as a means just to be a dick, but simply because eventually he was just feeling like there was no other choice because he was seeing all the evidence that seemingly was being blamed on Frankenstein, and he was just saying, look, it's no point. They're just going to kill him anyway, so just may as well get out of their way. But at the very end of the movie, with him wanting to blind Frankenstein with grenades and then harvest his organs, it kind of comes out of left field, and he comes off as being really sadistic about it. And it's just a bit jarring, and it makes him an unlikable character, in my opinion. So, yeah, I don't like Dr. Kawaji that much. He's kind of an asshole. And he is the one who inadvertently causes the final fight because his dumbass decides to toss a grenade and awaken Baragon. So good job, bruh. And finally, con number 3, and I already talked about this one, is that both endings to this movie suck. I actually do think the octopus ending is worse because Henry G. Saperstein was so impressed with the giant octopus scene in King Kong vs. Godzilla that he demanded an alternate ending be shot that has Frankenstein fight a giant octopus. And literally everybody said that makes no sense. But okay, you're giving us money. So they went and reshot the ending to include the octopus. Some say that makes more sense in context of War of the Gargantuas. I personally don't. I just think it's stupid. Not to mention, the octopus drags Frankenstein into a lake, not the ocean, a lake. I actually do think that the ending with the volcano and the ground swallowing up both monsters is the bit of a better ending, but I still think it's stupid because if you've seen my Son of Kong review, I don't like random end of the movie earthquake natural disaster endings. I think they're totally lazy. They're totally a cop-out, easy bullshit way for the writers to end the movie. And they always suffer from being extremely anticlimactic because literally as soon as Frankenstein snaps Baragon's neck, boom, earthquake, ground opens up and swallows Frankenstein, end of the movie. Yeah, both endings suck. The octopus ending, I think, is the shittier of the two. So I will say that I like the earthquake ending a bit more. Not saying much because I still think both suck, but it's just a lesser of two evils. And also, in my opinion, it also can explain War of the Gargantuas, which I will get to when I review War of the Gargantuas. So, aside from that, I absolutely love this movie. I think Frankenstein vs. Baragon is an extremely unsung masterpiece of a monster movie. It's very unique, very entertaining, and it certainly is one of a kind and a different breed of monster movie. It's highly entertaining. It's very well made. It's just a great film, in my opinion. So despite this movie's flaws, I will be awarding Frankenstein vs. Baragon a perfect solid 10 out of 10. If you haven't seen this movie and you're a big monster movie fan, I highly recommend you check this movie out. It's one of a kind. So with all that being said, post your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. And join me tomorrow as we introduce... well, it starts out good, and it ends good, but the middle is just bad. Where me and Ryan from Kaiju Network will be reviewing the very first Gamera movie. So join me tomorrow for 1965's Gamera, the Giant Monster. Push your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. And as always, if you're going to go out in the Japanese landscape and you have grenades, why the fuck do you have grenades? The fuck? And I will see you. Oh, and go and join my Facebook group, Jack Snipe Productions Official, where you can post videos, promote yourself, post discussion topics, and be the nerd that you want to be. And I will see you guys in the next video.